faces here today. I'm very happy to see you. My name is Eve Smith, and I'm a Senior English Language Fellow, which means that I am a teacher trainer, and I've been working on teacher training for about 6 years in different capacities. I've spent some time here now. It's about 1.5 years in Kiev, and before that I was in Afghanistan. I've done training in Pakistan, in Mexico, and Russia, and several other countries, and I've also taught, obviously, because there's no point in being a trainer if you don't teach. So I am sponsored by the U.S. State Department as part of their outreach programs, the same reason why we have this center, which is a lovely center full of wonderful books and resources. And I think that's enough about me. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We do a lot of activities here, which I'll tell you about later, but let's get started with grammar games, because the more important part of the activity is actually giving you a selection of different games to go through and to look at and to see how you might use them in your own classrooms. Okay, so when we first look or think about grammar, some of these statements might come to our mind. So if you'll just read through the 4 statements and decide which of the statements that you agree with. If you agree with them, why do you agree with them? And we'll talk about it in a minute. The first one is number 1, students need to be given details of grammar rules if they are to learn English successfully. Number 2, children do not learn grammar rules when they acquire their first language, so adults don't need to either. Number 3, if students get enough chance to practice using a language, they don't need to learn grammar. And number 4, it's helpful for students to be aware of grammatical information about the language. Okay, so I'm just going to give you about a minute to think about that, 30 seconds, and then we'll get back to it. Ready? You had enough time to ponder? Probably immediately you knew what your response was. Okay, so number 1, who agrees or disagrees and why? There are no wrong answers here.
So the first one is, of course, nice. Maybe not as deep details should be given, but the main, of course, should be. And number 4, of course,
Okay.
I agree with.
Okay, good. So for you, number 1, students need to be given details of grammar rules if they are to learn English successfully, with hesitation.
Because on details.
The details.
Deep, yes, how deep they should be.
Okay, good.
Sometimes deeper, sometimes not as deep.
That's true. And number 4, it's helpful for students to be aware of grammatical information about the language. Could you give me an example for number 1 in when do we need more details, when do we need less details about grammar usage? Like, what would the audience be, the learner?
Yes, according to the audience, sometimes if they have basic knowledge in grammar, yes, and there are always a lot of details, yes. Just for example, as for the present perfect, let's say, since, for, and such, and so on, yes. So from basic to more advanced.
Okay.
It depends on the level
Of the learner.
yeah.
Okay, great. Can anyone add to that? Yeah?
I would state that it depends not on the audience, but on the environment. If they are studying in the foreign countries with a native language, maybe they don't need such details of grammar.
Maybe yes and no, right? Because I think it depends on the learner. Because some learners, like, I look at myself, right? And I am in a country that Not everyone all the time is speaking Russian, which is fine because this is Ukraine, but there is enough Russian here that ideally if I went through with what you just said, I would say that I would not need to study as much grammar, but I need to study grammar. Because for me as a learner, I tried with Rosetta Stone for a little while and I got so angry because they never shared, like, I kept getting the same thing wrong. I didn't understand why. So I needed the grammar rule in order to continue to advance, even using something like Rosetta Stone. So for some learners, grammar is important. It doesn't necessarily, and you were right about the details, right? Some just need a general rule and they can apply it immediately because they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. From what I understood of my exposure to the language, now I can put two and two together. Others, probably more like me, need a little more description and examples and follow-up about the grammar. Also, I think we want to think about ages, right? Age can be an impact in this.
Sometimes adults require all the time some details and rules. They ask many questions, and children, they catch it automatically. So that's also...
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some adults are just really gifted, like probably the ones you were talking about.
No, I would say that communicating with you gives me much more than reading textbooks.
Ah, but your level is very high, no?
About grammar.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, so with children, you won't have to give them as much grammar. You probably shouldn't because that would maybe confuse them. But we do need maybe some grammar. Well, not maybe, we do need some grammar. Okay, number 2, I guess, does anyone agree with that? Most people are shaking their heads. No. Okay. Adults need grammar. And most of the research shows that when you are a child, it's easier to do a practice where the children learn through doing. Where when you're adult, that can be more frustrating for adults. Sometimes they need stop, explanation. Yeah? Okay. If students get enough chance to practice using a language, they don't need to learn grammar. There's a famous SLA research article that catalogs a man and I believe he was in Hawaii and his name was Wes, and he was learning English. And the reason that it's famous is it disproves this because he got ample amounts of time to practice English, but what happened is his errors became fossilized. He didn't, what I mean is that he had the same errors that he made consistently in English. He never learned to change those errors even when he was listening to the people communicating around him. So it is important for us to pay attention to grammar, especially sometimes to errors, just to make sure that the students don't internalize the wrong way to say something, right? It's helpful for students to be aware of grammatical information about the language. I think most of us would agree with that statement. Is that correct? Yeah. It's helpful. Okay.
Learning grammar is useful, but it takes often a lot of time.
Blood,
and
sweat, and
students
tears.
don't have time for practice English.
It's true. It is blood, sweat, and tears for me in grammar. In Russian.
Yeah.
Okay, but yes, very good point. What is the difference between covert and overt? You can make a guess. Someone may know.
No.
No.
It has nothing to do with covert.
I think of it in that way a little bit. Yes, to me, I try to associate covert with covered, because like secret. So the most common phrase I hear is like covert operation, means a secret operation. And the reason that that's the most common is because I watch a lot of spy movies, because I find it fascinating. But other people may have other reasons for knowing the word covert. But covert means something that's secret, something that's hidden. Overt is the opposite. So overt would be obvious. So covered and obvious is how I might remember those words in the future. So if we think about covert and overt, we have covert ways of teaching grammar. So hidden ways to get students to learn the grammar, and we have overt ways, which are very obvious, to get students to learn grammar. Can any of you think about how you might teach students in an overt way, so an obvious way? What's a grammar activity that you've done with students that would be considered overt?
Rules and exercises.
Okay, exercises role. Yeah, that's right. If I stand up here and I say, all right, now we are going to learn past imperfect or something like that, and we go through, that's obviously, I'm overtly teaching it to you. What about covert? How do we get our students to learn or practice grammar in a covert way?
Dialogues.
To give situation and then to explain the difference if it's past and present perfect, then to present different situations and then to show that it was in the past and speak about their own experience in the past and then in the present.
Okay, good. So as an activity, you could use dialogues, you could use in connection to what you were saying, where there's like, it sounded like a role play, right? Where they had to talk about something that happened in the past, or make a role play about something that happened in the past. They're using past tense, but we're not necessarily telling them how to use it before they use it. We may be trying to preview what past tense will look like without directly teaching past tense. So hopefully the idea would be that when you actually teach past tense, because they've already practiced it, they'll be aware, they'll be more aware of the language, and they'll be more able to accept the new information because they have had exposure to it, right? Okay, good. So we have the communicative approach, and the communicative approach basically looked at how people learn language, and they figured that, okay, people are currently learning language and grammar translation, but people don't always learn language the best way possible using grammar translation. That's one of many methods, right, that we can employ to learn a language. They also looked at what is it that people really want to say? Why are people learning languages? So these two questions created the communicative approach, because what they were looking at is how people learn language. They learn it by communicating. You're more likely to remember something that you learned when you had an activity that you did with it, or you had you were on the street and you were using new words and you understood them finally because you used them in the correct way, or someone introduced a new word to you. So that's how we learn language. What people want to say is they want to express their meaning, their meaning. Well, yeah, I guess they do want to express their internal meaning, but they want to express their opinions about things, right? They want to add meaningful discourse to a dialogue or to a conversation, and so that's also why we are communicating. So if you look at language functions, with the communicative approach, you want to, what they basically decided is that they were going to use the background of this how, what, and why are people communicating to create this new methodology for communication. And language functions fell into that. So how do you use the language to communicate? That's what we're teaching. We're teaching what do you use when you're saying X, Y, and Z. For example, if we were going to have a debate, I would teach you information about how to have a debate, right? What are the phrases that you say for agreement or disagreement? How do you, like, what grammar forms are you using? For example, if we were doing a debate, what grammar forms would we be using most likely to express our opinions?
Agree, disagree forms.
Present simple usually.
Present simple, okay. Subjunctive, yeah. Alright, so then we have communicative activities. So these activities were designed to stimulate everyday communication that the student would encounter in the street. Although we all know after the fact that this is, it's a good ideal, but it's very hard to stimulate that sort of communication in a real classroom, right? Because it's a textbook, you're trying, but it's not as authentic as we would like it to be. So that's basically the communicative approach. And I feel like the communicative approach has gone, we had more of a focus on grammar, then we had more of a focus on communication. And some people got really excited about the communicative approach because they felt like they no longer really had to teach so much grammar. And I believe it should be somewhere in the middle, where it's not all grammar, it's not all communication, but it's a mixture of both, right? Because if we go back to the first, they weren't quotes, but the first sentences I showed you, what we agreed on was that students do need some grammar within the context of a lesson and what they're learning. So we have grammar in the classroom, we have it in covert forms, we have it in overt forms, and these are changing based on the level of learner that we're teaching. For example, in beginning levels, we may have a lot of covert. Would you agree with that? If you think about when you teach beginning English levels? I think a lot of the time we're trying to get the students exposed to the language and to feel the language, and then we explain afterwards what it was they just learned. Are you, what?
No, it sounds nicely.
It sounds nice. Alright, intermediate and above. Do you use mainly covert or overt or a combination? What
But
would you
know,
say?
it depends on the language. I mean, when it is your mother tongue, you do it naturally and you do not explain. You just speak, you talk, and the children repeat after you. For example, instead of see, they say saw, and it's okay. When it is a foreign language, at the beginning level, you try to explain everything from the beginning to show how it is done, what is the right way, and so on and so on, depending whether it is your mother tongue or it is a foreign language.
Okay, sure, absolutely, that has an impact. I think with intermediate and above, I use a combination of both, but I also find that there are times where I need to teach overtly because there's a mistake that the students keep making about something specific that I've noticed, and then I have to have a lesson on that, whatever it is, and then practice activities that follow up with whatever they kept making mistakes on, because I don't want them to fossilize in their mistakes. I don't want them to get stuck with their particular mistakes. And I think that one of the things that they say here, this is based on Krashen's +1, is that whenever we're teaching, we want to make sure that sometimes we have the input occasionally above their level. So the reason for that is it stimulates them to work harder, to recognize that there's more to learn and to motivate them. so that they're not bored. If it's always at their level, it's very easy for the students to just kind of shut off because it's like, yeah, I know this is very boring. Occasionally you have to give them something that just goes, whoa, okay, what's that? And piques their interest. But we don't want to give them more than just above their level, because if we give them more than just above their level, so if this is I plus 1, and we give them I plus 5, what do you think will happen?
So they'll get confused.
Yeah.
Frustrated mostly.
And lose the interest.
They will lose their interest, be confused, be frustrated, be scared, and what the research shows is they will actually go backwards in their learning. So when we are considering making sure that we are keeping them motivated by having input occasionally above their level, we want to make sure it's not too far above their level. Okay, great. Finally, before we get to our playtime where you go through these activities, we have testing grammar. So who can read the first bullet point for me? What should we not test?
Don't test what you haven't taught.
Okay, don't test what you haven't taught. I think that's self-evident, right?
Yeah.
It would be very frustrating to be your student if you're testing something and you're like, I don't know this. I actually get a little aside, I get frustrated all the time because I currently have a teacher who sometimes will test me on things we haven't talked about yet. And I'm like, I don't know that conjugation. Like, we've never talked about this, and it's so frustrating. So you don't want your students to be in a state of frustration all the time. Make sure that you are testing what you have taught and what you have taught only. What about the next one?
Don't test general knowledge.
Okay, what does general knowledge mean? What is general knowledge?
Obvious things. Obvious.
Okay, like what?
Yeah.
Can you give an example of something that's obvious?
For example, what means I am or you are? Maybe something like.
That's a good guess. You are on the right track, but no. For the example, general knowledge is knowledge that as a society we all possess. So if I say Picasso was a painter, most of you would know immediately who I was talking about, because Picasso is general knowledge. Many people know about Picasso. So sometimes what happens is when tests are being written, we sometimes forget what we are testing. And I've seen tests that are supposed to be about grammar, but they're testing general knowledge. So an example of this is a test that I actually saw here. How do you spell Picasso, by the way? Is it 2 C's? No,
Yeah.
one. It is? One.
C with double S.
With double S, thank you. Can you answer that?
It's noticed.
The correct answer was this.
YN.
That's true. That's true. Why and? I mean, the question wasn't right in any way. But even worse, that it was Ann Painter. But I did see this on a test, and what we're testing here, one might argue that because you had Anne, if the correct answer had been artist, then the student would have recognized this as a grammar function, right? That every time, as you know, every time there's an N, it should be followed by a vowel. But what it looked like to me was happening is that they were just testing common knowledge. That they were an artist, they were a painter, they were a sculptor, they were whatever. it wasn't clear that this was the grammar form that they were going over, or that, you know, it could have been like is or are. You know, those very common tests where they have to choose between what is singular, what is plural. This would have made it a grammar question. But as it was a common knowledge question. So I think that it's very important for us to make sure that when we're writing our test questions, we're writing test questions that are specific to grammar and not to like common knowledge, as we said earlier. Okay, don't introduce new techniques in tests. What do you think this means?
Which students haven't done before, that it shouldn't be in test.
Yeah, exactly. And why do you think so?
Well, because it's confusing them and they don't know what to do with that activity. They will ask teacher one more time and they will fail there.
Okay, good. So it causes huge amount of anxiety in the learner, right? And ultimately, why are we giving a test? What's the purpose of a test?
Check.
To check if they got what we tried to teach them, right? And so in order to do that, we want to make sure that we're really providing them with something that will showcase their knowledge, not their ability to take a test. And because of that, as you said, we don't want to put new techniques into the test, because then it borders on, are we testing their ability to take a test or to complete the knowledge? Do we really want to add extra stress into their lives on the test day and possibly have them do worse on other parts because they're so confused? Or just take the test with the same sort of activities that they are already familiar with from class? Don't just test accuracy. Why not? What is that? First of all, what does that mean, and then why not?
So, not just spelling mistakes.
Okay,
but,
good.
So you should test them, but maybe put some less grades or something, or just underline or just correct or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but if you, it also depends on the level. But if you just correct only accuracy or spelling mistakes, let's say, yes, you can't do the test on this. It's a dictation or kind of something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just not interesting.
It's not interesting, and it doesn't really tell us what we want to know,
No.
right? Because we want to know how they can use it. I mean, yes, spelling is important, but it's not always crucial, as I can attest myself, seeing as I can even spell Picasso, or other things. But it's not the whole point of the test. Okay, what should we test instead, and how should we test it?
Well, if it's some time, like present simple or past continuous or whatever, we should choose exactly this time and use another this time in the sentences, in the questions, in the dialogues, but not some words which can be with some mistakes. So in that case, yeah.
Okay, good. So what I liked about what you said is you mentioned several different ways to test the same information. So you're identifying what the student will be tested on, what language function, and then you give them several different types of tests or several different activities or exercises to give them several opportunities to show that they can do it successfully. Okay, good. And don't forget to test the test. What do you think that means, and why should we do it?
Because there could be some even mistakes, and all perfect tests can be not really right in some moment. And mistakes can be in every book, in every publishing, it doesn't matter. So we should check before giving the test to children.
Yeah.
And not even mistakes, but some kind of misunderstanding in which
Yeah.
you can use
Yeah,
both for example, this is a tense. There are no just
So
exact.
maybe some word which is unknown to children and they won't be able to identify like some words.
Yeah,
It's different.
Absolutely. I remember when I was creating a test for where I used to work as a teacher at the University of Macau, my colleague and I, we worked really hard on the test, and then we gave it to be tested, and then we did the results, and we found that we actually had been testing something we didn't intend to test. So we had to go back, rewrite the test, and go through the process again. Only one section though. Oh, thank goodness. Otherwise it would have been very painful. But that really made me become a firm believer in testing the test, because it would have wasted my students' time, all of the teachers in my section's time. So anyway, it's very important. All right, next, if we move on, it's playtime. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a bunch of different grammar games. What I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to break into groups, or you can be one big group if you would like, however you would like to do this. And I'd like you to read through all the games and decide for each group what level of learner would you like to represent. So, for example, if you three are, let's say you're
Pupils.
year 4 in grade school. Okay, so you would look at what kind of activities would your year 4 students in grade school be able to complete and would be complementary to their textbook or what they're doing. Okay, and if you were a university, you would look in the same, but from the university perspective. Does that make sense? Okay, please play 2 of the games and then choose the one that you like the most and be able to explain how you would adapt it for your students. Okay, so first thing is creating your audience. Who are the students you work with? Go through, play 2 games, and then according to the audience that you chose, to be able to describe how you would use them in class. And then we'll talk about it together as a big group in, let's give you 30 minutes to do this. Okay? All right, any questions, comments, or concerns? No? Would it be helpful, or is there anyone here from university? Your university, your university, your university. Are you secondary school or
Yeah.
are you secondary?
We graduated.
You're just chilling. Okay, excuse me. So, may I ask all the universities to move over there and to work together? And then your graduates, you just do this. And then if the secondary school teachers will work together, I feel like this might make it more meaningful for you. And this is an extra one if you need it.